I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 10, Sunday, August 4th, 2024. The lesson is entitled, A Faithful Servant in the Church. Lesson text comes from Acts chapter 9, verses 36 through 43. Related scriptures are 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 18 through 37. Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 19 and 23 through 26. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. The place is Joppa. The time is 35 AD. Faithfulness is often lived out quietly by people not recognized as glamorous or popular. Sarah Lindow was a member of our small church in upstate New York. While I was visiting her one day, she shared her daily prayer list with me. Mrs. Lindow handed me 6 sheets of paper containing the names of nearly 200 individuals for whom she prayed each day. I was honored to see my name at the top of the page. I remember looking at her and stating, "Please never take my name off that list." She passed away a few years later, and I sensed the loss of her support and spiritual strength. Christianity has succeeded throughout the centuries because of the anonymous servants of Christ behind the scenes. They are dedicated to utilizing their talents and gifts for the glory of God, uninterested in personal gain or recognition. Today's aim, facts, to understand the culture of discipleship in the early church. Principle, to appreciate the position of Dorcas, the mourners, and Peter as the story unfolds. Application, to show that God desires that we serve as faithful disciples using the abilities He has given us. Illustrating the lesson. Our lesson highlights the faithfulness of true disciples of Christ. Dorcas faithfully served others. Her fellow disciples believed God could raise her to life, and Peter acted in faith to do just that. Practical points. 1. Christians are great blessings for Christ as they lovingly serve their communities. Acts 9:36. 2. Active faith leaves a lasting impression on those we encounter, verses 37 through 38. 3. Active faith attracts those seeking peace and comfort in times of crises, verse 39. 4. God works through those who will submit to Him in faith and rely on His power, verse 40. 5. God is still using those who believe He can bring life into the midst of death, verse 41. 6. God's people are called to make His truth known to all who will hear, verses 42 through 43. Golden text. She stretches out her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. Proverbs 31:20. Today we have 2 lesson outlines. The first is a faithful friend. Acts 9:36 through 38. The second is a faithful God. Acts 9:39 through 43. Introduction. Christianity grew widely in the early churches, in the early years of the church. New Christians dramatically experienced forgiveness of sin and were filled with a hope and a new purpose. They eagerly shared this experience with people who were still living in darkness and hopelessness. One of the ways they shared their faith was through ministering to those in need. Widows were especially vulnerable, often having no one to advocate for them and often in dire circumstances. Acts 6:1 through 2, 1 Timothy 5:3 through 16. One disciple, a woman named Tabitha, was especially known for always doing good and helping the poor. Acts 9:36. There are many ways that the church can share its faith in Jesus Christ in our modern society. The needy and widows are still prime examples of people who need believers to share the love of Christ to meet their needs. Tabitha proves a good model to follow. A faithful friend. Acts 9:36. Now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did. Verse 37. And it came to pass in those days that she was sick and died, whom when they had washed, they laid her in an upper chamber. Verse 39. And forasmuch as Lydda was nigh to Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent unto him 2 men, desiring him that he would not delay to come to them. A good woman. Acts 9:36. After detailing the conversion of Saul and his initial ministries in Damascus and Jerusalem, Luke, the author of Acts, continues Peter's story. As Peter traveled around the country, he came to Lydda, where he healed a man named Aeneas of paralysis, verses 32 through 34. The town of Joppa was about 12 miles away, where there lived a certain disciple named Tabitha, verse 36, also known by her Greek name Dorcas, both meaning gazelle. Today's Jaffa, now a part of Tel Aviv, is ancient Joppa. It was from here that Jonah tried to flee from God. In contrast, Peter went to Joppa to serve God. Joppa was a predominantly Jewish town, reinforcing the depiction of Peter as following his ministerial call to the Jews, Galatians 2:7 through 9. Dorcas was known for her good works and helpful deeds for others. She modeled the servant heart of Christ, eager to give others a helping hand when it was needed. Luke characterized her as full of good works and charitable acts. Acts 9:36, indicating that she very willingly put aside her own needs and planned activities in order to reach out and help others who faced problems. Dorcas' ministerial heart and loving kindness impacted many people, as indicated by the many widows who surrounded Dorcas at her time of need. A grievous loss. Acts 9:37. While Peter was ministering in nearby Lydda, Dorcas became sick and died. One wonders why God sometimes allows his faithful servants to die when they are eager to minister, while allowing other people to live who otherwise have no interest in serving him. Regardless, the reason why God grants life and breath to anyone is so they can serve him. It is always hard to accept the death of someone who is kind, active, and useful in a local church. People like Dorcas are needed everywhere, but God, in his greatness, accomplishes his will even through losses that are difficult to bear. He has the right to give and take away. So even when the loss is painful, we should continue to be thankful and trust in his sovereign will and control. The death of Dorcas was truly a great loss to that congregation, but the believers in Joppa had hope in spite of it. It was customary for the bodies of the deceased to be buried immediately. Acts 5:1 through 10. The fact that the believers washed Dorcas's body and laid her in an upper chamber instead of having her buried immediately indicates an unusual approach. Washing the body was a common practice in many cultures, including among the Jews. Another common practice was to anoint the body with spices, but Luke doesn't mention if Tabitha's body was anointed. We will soon see that her friends were aware of Peter's presence in Lydda. Although we have no record of any of the apostles previously bringing someone back to life after death, it is possible that these friends were hoping for that most unusual result. A hopeful request. Acts 9:38. The short distance between Joppa and Lydda allowed news of Peter's healing ministry to reach Joppa quickly. Distressed as they were over Dorcas's death, they turned to Peter for help. The Bible does not specifically record instances of the apostles raising anyone from the dead up to the time of Acts 9, but God's power was definitely at work in Peter. The disciples in Joppa sent two men from their group to find Peter. Given the urgency to bury a dead body, the men likely set off at once on the 3-hour southeasterly journey. Once they found Peter, the disciples implored him to come at once without delay. We understand the urgency of the situation when we realize that decomposition began soon in the warm climate, and since several hours of travel each way was required, time was of the essence. We are not told what Peter was doing when the two messengers arrived, but evidently he was able to leave immediately and accompany the men back to Joppa. Those in ministry know that emergency situations require immediate attention. During such times, we must lean heavily on the Lord and ask for his guidance. Emergencies can arise in everyday life for any one of us. The only way we can be prepared to handle unexpected situations is to have a consistently close walk with God at all times. Then, when the unexpected hits, we are fully aware of his presence and strengthening power. A faithful God. Verse 39. Then Peter arose and went with them. When he was come, they brought him into the upper chamber, and all the widows stood by him weeping and showing the coats and garments which Dorcas made while she was with them. Verse 40. But Peter put them all forth and kneeled down and prayed, and turning him to the body said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Verse 41. And he gave her his hand and lifted her up, and when he had called the saints and widows, presented her alive. Verse 42. And it was known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Verse 43. And it came to pass that he tarried many days in Joppa with one Simon a tanner. Peter's arrival, Acts 9:39. Peter immediately started out with the two men. As soon as he arrived in Joppa, he was ushered into the upper chamber where Dorcas' body was lying. As was typical of death rituals in the ancient Middle East, Mark 5:38 through 39, Peter found Dorcas' body surrounded by mourners. Dorcas was a benefactor or patron of many widows, and they gathered around her body to comfort one another. The mourners impressed upon Peter her generosity, showing him robes and other clothing she had made for them, some of which they were likely wearing at the very moment. More than an effort to convey Dorcas's competence as a seamstress, the widows were testifying to her love for people in abject poverty. No doubt Dorcas's ministry restored some measure of respect to some impoverished widows. If you have a talent for sewing, use it to help others and glorify God. If your talent is automobile mechanics, you can be a great encouragement when you fix someone's broken vehicle, especially if it belongs to a widow or a single mother. If your talent is music, it should be used as a means of exalting God and pointing others to him in worship. If you have handyman or construction skills, or computer skills, or resume writing skills, God has granted these to you so you can minister to people. Each one of us is valuable in God's eyes and designed to minister to others, so we should never feel insignificant or unimportant. Peter's prayer, Acts 9:40. What Peter did here closely follows Jesus' pattern in raising Jairus' daughter, Mark 5:35 through 42. The first thing Peter did was send everyone else out of the room, just as Jesus had dismissed a number of people before healing the young girl. Peter then knelt down and prayed, showing that he was not relying on any power of his own, but on what God had accomplished through him. We see the same attitude in the healing of Aeneas, when Peter said to Aeneas, Jesus Christ maketh thee whole, arise and make thy bed. Acts 9:34. Peter recognized that whatever spiritual authority and power he might have came from God and was not in him himself. Even in the use of our gifts and talents, we should remember that what we have has been given to us by God. We have not earned or achieved such abilities on our own, so we should not take pride in the ways God uses us. All the glory belongs to him. Peter's words to Dorcas were, Tabitha, arise, verse 40. The fact that Peter used Tabitha's Aramaic name instead of her Greek name, Dorcas, is a fairly strong indication that Peter was speaking with her in Aramaic. Thomas Constable pointed out, there is only one letter difference in what Peter said, Tabitha cumi, and what Jesus had said, Talitha cumi, little girl, get up. This miracle is another evidence of Jesus' working powerfully through his witnesses in word and deed. The instant response revealed both God's power and the depth of Peter's faith in Jesus' continuing presence and ability to accomplish miracles. Peter was doing the works Jesus had previously given his apostles when he said, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils, freely ye have received, freely give, Matthew 10:8. On that occasion, Jesus sent the 12 disciples on a mission to preach the kingdom of heaven to the Israelites only. For that early mission, he prohibited them from going to the Gentiles. But now that Jesus had been crucified and risen from the dead, it was time for the mission to the Gentiles to begin. In only a few days, Peter would be instrumental in proclaiming the gospel to Gentiles. It must have been a source of deep joy to him to see such a work of God through him, apparently restoring life for the first time. Presentation to the saints, Acts 9:41. At Peter's command to rise, Dorcas opened her eyes and sat up. In a social context where a person is considered unclean if they enter a room with a dead body, Peter reaches out his hand to take Dorcas's hand, just as was the case whenever Jesus touched an unclean person. God's power through Peter purified any uncleanness. It must have been with great sense of joy that Peter called out to the believers who were there, especially the widows who had been mourning the death of their friend, and presented her alive once again. Although Peter was being greatly used by God in unique ways, he had emotions and surely would have been moved by this miraculous event, as any of us would. The joy the apostles felt when they did great miracles for God can be ours when we reach out and help others in need, as both Peter and Dorcas did. God does not intend for us to live only for ourselves, but has given us the privilege of having relationships. He wants us to encourage and benefit others. Prevailing message, Acts 9:42 through 43. Soon the whole town had heard about the raising of Dorcas. Her own popularity surely contributed to the news spreading quickly. The miracle gave Peter and the other believers opportunities to share the gospel message, for many others became believers as a result of this one incident. Peter did not claim personal greatness because of what had happened, but rather simply pointed people to Jesus. To both the healing of Aeneas and Aeneas in Lydda and the raising of Dorcas in Joppa, there was a response of faith. Acts 9:35 reads that after Aeneas's healing, many turned to the Lord. After Dorcas's raising, we read that many believed in the Lord, verse 42. Both phrases indicate faith in Jesus as Savior and Lord. As was the case with Jesus' own ministry, miracles function to draw attention to Christ and message that he preached. Miracles had the same function for Peter and other apostles. Christianity was still in its infancy, and miraculous healings ensured that the news would spread widely and rapidly. After hearing of such amazing events brought a curiosity to learn more about Jesus and apostles who were healing in his name. God was accomplishing the spread of the gospel through his servants, and the family of God was increasing steadily. God's plan continues to focus on spreading the good news of salvation through us. Peter stayed in Joppa many days as the guest of Simon the tanner. Tanners were not looked upon favorably by Jewish people because of their constant contact with the skin of dead animals, making them ceremonially unclean. Leviticus 11:40. In the next chapter of Acts, Peter would be sent to minister to a group of Gentiles at the home of Cornelius. So his stay with Simon served as preparation for his next assignment in ministry. We have to appreciate Peter's willingness to serve in whatever way God directed, even when it might have been outside his comfort zone. He was a faithful disciple, always eager to do what his master wanted. He is an example we should follow. Questions. 1. What two people and what two towns are mentioned in this account of Peter's ministry? 2. What was Dorcas's reputation among the people of Joppa? 3. What happened to Dorcas that caused sorrow in the town, and what did the people do with her? 4. To whom did Dorcas's friends reach out for help, and what made them think of doing this? 5. How did the people of Joppa let Peter know how much Dorcas had meant to them? 6. What initial action by Peter mimicked what Jesus had done? 7. Why is it important to know that Peter prayed before doing anything else? 8. What happened after his prayer? 9. What happened in Joppa as a result of this incident? 10. Where did Peter stay, and why is this significant? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, August 4th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.